Hello, this is Frida Liu and you're watching The Shift Asia. The oil palm industry is always under close scrutiny when it comes to sustainability. Kuala Lumpur Kepong Berhad, or KLK, is one of the biggest players in the industry with its core business anchored in oil palm and rubber plantation development. They hold a leading position in the industry and are constantly pushing boundaries to optimize productivity and operational efficiency in its operations. It is also prioritizing innovation in planting materials and sustainable practices. We're going to find out a bit more about what they're doing, and I'm here with Kok Peng, its Chief Sustainability Officer, to talk about its sustainability efforts. So, good morning, Ku. It's good to see you again after all these years. Now, the main thrust of KLK's business is still in oil plantations, right? And I know there's a lot when it comes to the oil palm industry, but what are the considerations when it comes to sustainability? And maybe let's start with the management of the plantations itself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Frida. I've now been in this function for just over 2 years. And to begin with, I'm very fortunate that my predecessors in the function has put on a very solid foundation, especially with regards to sustainability practices in the plantation, or what we call the upstream.
Right.
So to give you an idea, we were the pioneering member of RSPO since 2004. And essentially, RSPO is a multi-stakeholder governance organization, and it promotes the growth and the use of sustainable palm oil through credible global standards. So we were with them since 2004, and what followed suit was we then also adopted 𝗏𝗏𝗏 ISPO, which is the Indonesian standard, and the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Standard as well, or MSPO. Following from that, we then promulgated our sustainability policy, and that was launched in 2014, and it was further revised in 2018. And basically, the sustainable policy adopts the principle and criteria of RSPO, so it's very closely aligned. And the core of the policy actually relates to our belief in no deforestation, no new peat, and no exploitation. So it is a very firm commitment, and our commitment to NDP is certainly very strong.
Right.
And of course, with policies, we have to reiterate time and again.
Right.
And in fact, we're doing a revision this year, and we hope to roll out the revised, what we call our revised sustainability policy sometime this year.
Right.
So building on that strong foundation that was laid by my predecessor, since 2022 when I came in, we have also aligned the organization with the evolving sustainability landscape. So last year was actually quite a milestone year in the sense that we launched our 7 sustainability commitments, which were built on 6 focus areas. And our 6 focus areas were, at this point in time, carbon management, human rights, traceability, innovation and inclusivity, conservation and biodiversity, and disclosures.
Right.
And what are our 7 commitments? So the 7 commitments covers, the focuses in those 6 areas. So the 7 will be, 1, we aim for 25% carbon intensity reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Number 2, we aim for 100% traceability to plantation for refinery and KCPs, or kernel crushing plants.
Okay.
I'm mindful of the jargons.
Yeah.
And 100% traceability to mill for our oleo operation.
Right.
Later on, we can discuss a little bit about what this TTP and TTM is about. Number 3, we aim for 50 product carbon footprint by 2025.
Right.
And this is something that's really demanded by our customers, especially those from the Western world. Number 4, maintain zero tolerance for forced labor and child labor, very important issues with the Western world. Number 5, aim for 0 fatalities and 25% reduction in lost time injury by 2026. Number 6, safeguard biodiversity through conservation and continued commitment to no deforestation, no peat, as well as preservation of high conservation, high conservation value and high carbon stock land.
Right.
And finally, continue our investment in the 4 pillars of corporate responsibility.
Right.
So in a nutshell, I built on the foundation that was very well put together by my predecessor, but I have to take our sustainability practices into more and more what is evolving around the world, where certification and standards alone were no longer sufficient.
Right, and everything is measurable, everything is sort of calculated and all that. There's a lot that's happening there, and I've got a lot of questions around it, a lot to understand myself, right? Okay, one of the things is you talk about inclusion, right? How do you manage the workers and also the smallholders?
Yeah, I think our workers, including our migrant guest worker, and you realize that I use the term guest workers because really they are our guests who are working in our country. They are very critical for the success of the group. As you would know, the plantation segment is heavily reliant on migrant labor because the same work the locals do not want to take on. And this is despite the fact that compensation has become better. And yet, these are jobs that the locals consider too demeaning for them to take on. For us, there's no question about it. It must be treated with dignity, with respect, and with care. And this means that they must be fairly compensated. They must have conducive working and living environment, and their rights needs to be protected. I'll give you a few highlights or examples. Recently, we completed an independent third-party peninsula-wide human rights risk assessment, which is benchmarked against the International Labour Organization's 11 indicator for forced labour. And the finding of the assessment basically demonstrated that we have been adhering to very high standards, but there are some room for improvement. So we are taking some remediation action. And I think the final remediation action will be completed in the next few months. And this is aligned to our zero recruitment cost policy. Basically, the whole idea is that these migrant guest workers that come and work with us should not be incurring any cost for them to land and work in Malaysia. And the moment they land here, it is our responsibility to make sure that they are well compensated, they have their liberty preserved, so you don't hold their passports. So they have lock and keys to their own passports and all that. Their living conditions are taken care of, and their work condition needs to be safe. So they need to wear their PPEs. It's our job to educate them to wear the PPEs. Those sort of things, which may not be the easiest thing to do sometimes, with workers. The other thing that is worth highlighting is we are having to constantly improve on our housing. These are where our workers stay. So last year, we started a 3-year program for Peninsular Malaysia. We committed about 85 million ringgit, where we will refurbish and rebuild and renovate about 1,800 units across the peninsula. So over the next 3 years, from 2023 to 2025. And in addition to that, we have further committed another 90 million that is allocated to Sabah and to Indonesia. And that program kicks off this year. Will probably take about 3 years as well, and it will be completed in 2026. So I think we've touched on the, whether we are in keeping with the ILO standards. We talk about housing, and then there is also workers' grievance. So we have robust existing, what you call workers' grievance management channel, but we decided that with the advent of smartphones, and it might surprise some people that most of our migrant workers actually have basic smartphones. So we are creating a digital channel so that they are able to file any workers' grievance that they may have digitally just by using a QR code. And these grievance channels are actually in their own native language. So you create the access and you create the ability to stay anonymous if they wish to. And this is to protect them when they file a complaint. And one other highlight that I think is worthwhile mentioning is that we operate 160 childcare, nursery, so this includes creches, nursery, kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools across our plantations. And as of today, we have about 12,000 children who are children of our workers, as well as some of the underprivileged children in the communities where we operate. And this is across Sabah, Indonesia, and Liberia. So we take great pains to make sure that we create an environment where these migrant guest workers or these workers, and in the case of Indonesia, they are not migrant.
Right.
In Liberia, they are locals as well. They are really taken care of. Their children are taken care of. They work in a safe environment. They have decent living condition, and they are properly compensated.
So your plantations span across Malaysia, Indonesia, and Liberia. So when you talk about Liberia, what are some of the things that's happening there?
Liberia is actually a place where the potential yield is in fact very promising.
Right.
But the landscape in Liberia can be quite challenging, right? So one of the things that allude to this challenging environment is, for example, typically we would certify our plantation in a very short time. But in Liberia, it's taken a while because of the difficult condition. But nonetheless, we're committed to certifying our Liberia plantation. And if you look at our certification on a whole, excluding Liberia and also excluding our recently acquired plantation from another company, we are at about 95% certified. And if you take into consideration the major acquisition that we did 3 years ago, then that number comes down to about 76%.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think with regards to Liberia, it is the same commitment with regards to the workers' welfare, and it's the same priority with regards to making sure that we are producing the crops in a very sustainable fashion there as well.
Right, and I think it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also something that customers are expecting from at the end of the day, right? Now, you're also into resource-based manufacturing, refinery and oleochemical, and vertically integrated. You've also vertically integrated your upstream, midstream, and downstream businesses with operations across 8 countries, right, from Malaysia to Netherlands. What are the sustainability practices here?
It's interesting that you just preface the question by saying there's a good doing the right things.
Yeah.
So we also have a guiding principle that for us, sustainability is about ensuring that the people, the planet, and the business must all thrive.
Yeah.
Right. And the key word here is thrive, because it's not about doing sustainability for the sake of checking the boxes, but it's to make sure that the people have a better living, they have upward mobility, the environment is protected in the process, and the business must be able to make enough money to be able to reinvest in the people and the planet. So with regards to manufacturing, it is a little bit different from plantation, because plantation is quite centered on the certification, your good agricultural practices on the ground, and it all is predicated on producing higher yields from the same amount of land. And for your audience who may not know, palm actually uses the least amount of footprint in terms of land compared to the edible oils like soy and rapeseed and sunflower and all that. And on top of that, its yield is the highest as well. So the plantation, or the upstream as we call it, is very focused on yield. Improving yield on the same amount of land to be able to feed people and to be able to provide for good livelihood for the people that work in the industry. Manufacturing is a little bit different. I think our priority when it comes to sustainability in manufacturing is predicated mainly in 2 areas. One is carbon management, and the other one is the the other one is traceability. So carbon reduction is all about reducing the emission that is coming out of our operation. So in the manufacturing operation, we will use gas, we will use gas to produce power, to produce heat in the process. And it's about how do you reduce the loss of the heat, for example, and reusing the heat and all that. And all that counts towards carbon reduction. And when you have reduced carbon emission, then your product carbon footprint of particular products that goes out of the factory also correspondingly come down. And the lower carbon footprint is what customers are looking for more and more. I think what's also very interesting is we are probably the first company that has come up with a commitment on product carbon footprint. But I'm sure that the others are going to follow suit very soon. The second area of focus for manufacturing is traceability. Traceability is not the same as certification or standards. Certification and standards is about the practices that produces the good outcome. But traceability is about tracing it back to where the raw material or the ingredient is produced. And this year, as your audience will know, is the year where EUDR will come to the fore. And EUDR will come into strict enforcement on the 1st of January of 2025. And so this is where traceability is very important. The EUDR type of traceability requires that you are able to trace it back to the land where the crop is produced. And that piece of land must not be deforested beyond 2020. And the piece of land must be operated legally as well. And it is not easy to be able to trace all the way down. And the supply chain in palm is actually very complicated. So the crops are mixed, they are commingled, they are sold from one party to another. There are many traders and dealers involved. And it is actually very, very difficult to trace it all the way down to the plantation for a particular consignment. But be that as it may, I think we have put in the structure and the governance now, whereby we are looking at how do we meet the demand that's coming out of Europe, where do we get the supply, how can we ensure that the supply is kosher, and then at the same time figuring out what are the systems and platforms that we need to be able to demonstrate the due diligence that it is indeed traceable and verify it's deforestation free.
You know, things like the EUDR and all that, and I'm just like curious, how much notice do we get of all these things in terms of new standards? And sometimes we always hear these things and suddenly we have to comply to new things, right? Do we in your experience or is it fair? Are we given enough time to adhere to all these standards that come about?
It really depends from case to case. So with the RSPO principle and criteria, the calendar is that it gets revised once every 5 years. And as part of the revision process, there will be task force and working groups that will be involved across the 7 different stakeholders that makes up the RSPO. So there is quite a long process, and there's a lot of room for debate and for discussion and for negotiation and for compromises to be made. So I would say for a multi-stakeholder organization like RSPO, there is a process, albeit perhaps the process could always be improved on, but there is a process and there's enough time. So case in point, last year at the General Assembly of the RSPO for 2023, we should have ratified and roll out the PNC version 2023. But because we needed more time, this will now be ratified at the General Assembly this year. Right? And then the new PNC will be rolled out. In the case of EUDR, I think what was lacking was that the engagement with the producing countries at the onset was lacking. Right? So what then happens is that the promulgation of the regulation coming out of the EU was one that was made without really understanding the complexity of the supply chain of the producing countries. So it was only after the regulations were enforced, which was May last year, and then it needs to be fully complied with in January next year, that the engagement with the producing countries started. And that too involved the producing countries having to make a very strong and robust stand with regards to the EUDR. Better late than never, but it could have been a lot more effective. I think nobody is arguing that we don't want deforestation to happen. But will the regulation result in the right outcomes, or would it result in some unintended consequences? So one possible unintended consequence could be that the majority of smallholders could be kept out of the supply. And that would be very unfortunate because the industry is predicated on the 3 Ps, right? The planet, the people, and the prosperity of the business and all that. And when you are excluding the well-being of the people out of this, that is a very negative, unintended consequence.
What they say, an equitable and just transition.
Yes.
right? And if that's not the case, then you're, as much as, that balance, right? Of course, of the planet and of course the people at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, what about in the area of conservation and biodiversity? What else is KLK doing?
Actually, that's something that gets me very excited because we do a lot. So we have in KLK our corporate responsibility, what you call umbrella is called KLK Care. And within KLK Care, there is a sub-umbrella called Bumi Kita, or Our Earth. And that's focused on conservation and biodiversity. So our conservation and biodiversity efforts are what you call grouped in 3 areas. These are landscape within our own land, landscape adjacent to our land, and landscape that are ex situ. That means it's completely outside of our land. So I got a couple of examples. Within our own land, our own landscape, one of the very good examples is we've started a project with the World Wildlife Fund and a consumer group company called 𝗲𝗲𝗃. And we are reforesting or restoring a 7.1 hectare corridor into a wildlife corridor that will connect 2 forest reserves. We found orangutan individuals and elephants. And what happened was the natural corridor that existed before were basically taken away. So we then decided to use our own land and to reconnect the 2 reserves. So I think that is really something that we're very passionate about. In the adjacent landscape, another example that I can give is our partnership with 𝗏𝗏. And this was to rehabilitate a 33-hectare wildlife habitat with 𝗵𝗃𝘁 tree and napier grass. And the whole idea is to cultivate the food supply for elephants. So this is also adjacent to one of our Sabah estate. And the idea is when you give them food, and you give them a place where they can go and have their fill of the stomach and also enjoy their spa, so there are pockets of like water spaces where they could roll around and all that, then they actually don't encroach into your area. So this is part of what we call the human-elephant coexistence program. In our parlance, we call it the 𝗵𝗁𝗃𝗁. The other thing that we're very excited about, and this is ex situ, is our partnership with 𝗲𝗏𝗏. And what we do is we train, we equip, and we deploy 𝗤𝗲 troopers. They go into the jungle in the Aman Jaya area, which is near the Belum Temenggur complex. And the whole idea is to allow them to pick up the traps that are put in by the poachers. So poaching is one of the key contributor towards our declining Malayan tiger population. The other will be the loss of natural food, and then the the breakup in terms of the habitat that they have. Our central forest spine is kind of disjointed, so they can't really move from one place to another. So we can't do everything. So we focus on the patrols, and by working with the Orang Asli, the 𝗤𝗲 tribe, actually it also helps to give them livelihood, and at the same time they will not be approached by the poachers to be working with them to poach these tigers.
Well, I hear these stories that the poachers are still very daring. What about, you talk about innovation and inclusivity. What are some of the things that you do there?
For inclusivity, smallholder is one of the areas that we look at, because the best way in which we can include the people that are related to what we do are our smallholders. And speaking of smallholders, I think I do have to mention that in Indonesia, for example, as a requirement by the government, you have to develop the smallholder plots. And then these smallholder plots, once the capital expenditure is recouped, is actually handed back to the smallholder. So this is a program called Plasma. And in Indonesia, we have about 20,000 of these Plasma hectareages. And we have been doing quite well in most of them. And about 10,000 of them, or about half of them, are actually certified under ISPO or RSPO already. But in addition to that, we also work on independent smallholder, where sometimes we work with NGOs, other times we work with customers, where we help these independent smallholder to improve on their yield so that their livelihood will improve. But in some instances, we go beyond that. So for example, in Sugut and Sandakan, we have a program called Rurality with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Foundation.
Okay.
And this is where we go beyond just good agricultural practices. We actually also help them in terms of income diversification, so they can plant a diversified crop that will give them cash in addition to the income that they get from palm.
I see.
And we also help the women folks in terms of uplifting their economy as well. So they make certain handicrafts that we sell, help them to sell to, some of these states' agencies and whatnot.
Okay. And I guess like working with KLK, talent management, right? What do you all do around talent management?
I think ultimately, moving into the future, in order for a company to be able to continue to thrive and to prosper, you need to attract the right sort of talents. And the new generation of talent these days are those that are looking at companies that are sustainable in practice. So it is very important that we must truly embed sustainability in the way the company operates. And then you also need to make sure that you are positioning yourselves accordingly. So you need to communicate. So one of the things that we have done since 2 years back when I joined the company is we've done a lot of internal communication because sustainability is also involving change management. Right? So you need to communicate what you're doing and you need to get people on board. So this is through things like I write a monthly newsletter to everyone in the company. We do global town halls. I make it a point to do onboarding sessions, as frequently as I can. So whether they are new joiners or whether they are people within the company, they must understand what is sustainability, why is it important for them, why is it important for the company, and then you need to communicate accordingly in your process of talent acquisition.
Right. And when you look at this, right, when you talk about talent acquisition, I guess it's like conversations with your daughter, right? right. Why would you want to join a company? Like, what would appeal to them to join an organization, right?
Right.
Yeah. As we move forward.
Correct. So young talents wants to work for a company that is sustainable, not just from an environmental perspective. They want a company that also respect human rights. They want to work for a company that promotes mobility, growth and all that. And also, obviously, they want company that govern themselves very well, right? So, anti-corruption and things like that.
Right. Thanks for spending time and talking about this industry, the oil palm industry, and what KLK is doing. And of course, I've been speaking to Kok Peng, and you've been watching The Shift Asia.